All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. We have an amazing alumni panel of alumni from graphic design and architecture, and I'm going to introduce them so you all get up to speed on what they've done since being at Cranbrook. We have 4-ish slides from each of them about their own practices, and then it's a conversation about the business of running a studio, and they were literally in your seats not too long ago, just moments ago. I don't actually know how long ago, so just babies before. All right, so I'll start with Lillian. Lillian Crum is a Michigan-based educator and designer. She is the Associate Dean for the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Technological University, where she also teaches as a tenured Associate Professor of Graphic Design. She is a partner and creative director at Unsold Studio, an award-winning design studio that focuses on building brands for clients ranging from cultural institutions to corporate and retail enterprises. Lillian has presented about design and design education in both local and international venues, including countries such as Canada, Portugal, Greece, United Arab Emirates, Russia, and Singapore. In 2019, Unsold Studio represented Detroit and the United States at the UNESCO Cities of Design convening in Singapore, organized by the Singapore Design Council. In 2020, Lillian was selected as a notable woman in design by Crane's Detroit Business. Lillian received her MFA in 2D design from Cranbrook Academy of Art and her HBA in art and art history from the University of Toronto and Sheridan College. Lillian also serves on the AIGA Detroit Board of Directors as the Education Chair and on the Southfield Public Arts Commission. Her partner, Meaghan Berry, is an Associate Professor of Graphic Design and the Chair of the Department of Art, Art History, and Design at Oakland University. She also serves as partner at Unsold Studios. Berry's creative scholarship focuses on design as an economic driver for communities, with an emphasis on branding for small businesses and nonprofits. Her forthcoming book, Designing for Local Communities, A Guide to Freelancing and Empowering Groups in Your Neighborhood, will be published by Bloomsbury in 2025 and is now available for pre-order. Congratulations. Her design work has been recognized by Graphics Design Annual, Indigo Design Awards, Creative Communication Awards, and Detroit Commerce Design Awards. She was selected as a 2020 Notable Woman in Design by Crane's Detroit Business, a 2019 Oakland County Executive 40 Under 40, and a UNESCO City of Design delegate, where she represented the United States at Singapore Design Week in 2019. She has presented about her teaching and research at conferences in Canada, Greece, Mexico, Singapore, and throughout the United States. Her writing has appeared in AIGA, Eye on Design, and Design and Culture. Berry received her MFA from Cranbrook and her BFA in Communication Design from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Elise DeChard is the owner of N Studio, a Detroit-based woman-owned architecture, design, and research practice exploring playful techniques to transcend the traditional architectural experience. She has worked on everything from community art spaces to collaborative manufacturing centers to fortune-telling walls of TVs. Elise is a member of Matterfruit Artist Cooperative and founded Tessellate, an experimental gallery in residency. She was named a 2021 Crane's Detroit Notable Woman in Design and was a Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Scholar in 2022. She holds an M.Arch from Cranbrook and has taught at Lawrence Technological University and Kendall College of Art and Design. So please help me welcome them. All right, who's doing the Unsold? All right, do you want to go up a little? Sure.
Okay. I'm good. All right, so thanks for having us. So Lil and I, you got a little overview of where we come from, but we were here, we graduated in 2012 from 2D design before it was renamed graphic design. So it's been over 10 years, which is sad, but good. So we're gonna talk about Unsold Studio, but just so you guys know, we don't run the studio full time. So we are doing a lot of other things. So as Lynn mentioned, we're both in academia. So that is sort of where, as we have conversations today, I think it's important to keep in mind that's where our healthcare, our retirement, like that affords us a lot of luxury in the design studio space of like being able to say no to projects. So I always like to put that caveat out. And then we also have our own things going as well. So like I'm writing, Lil also is represented by art galleries and her work is in different collections. So she's continued to make, that actually was part of her thesis work here. So do you want to talk about this or do you want me to keep going? Want me to go? All right. Okay. This is how we roll. So I should also note that Lil and I met at Cranbrook. So our studios were side by side. And so the way that our studio started is that once we graduated, Lil moved back to Toronto. I stayed here. I had a job that I was going to start in the fall. So I worked at like a little burger place in Birmingham for the summer. And I met a guy there, he was the manager, and he wanted to be a chef. And I was like, why don't I host a pop-up dinner and brand you in my apartment in Pontiac, and we'll trick everyone and they'll think they're going to Detroit, but they're gonna go to Pontiac. We won't tell them the location until after. And so that was our first client. So Mark, we were able to name Stockyard. It became this like little cute mobile food thing. He ended up doing dinners for Shinola, and that led to other things. So the reason I made this graphic this way is to show sort of like, again, to riff on Taylor Swift, but like the eras of Unsold Studio is like the Stockyard project was like dropping a stone in water for us, and then it rippled out. So Real Team Real Estate is like not our dream client, but it was a friend of Mark's that like we didn't know them. It was strangers to us. And so that was our first client, and then we got another client, and then we got more and more and more. And so it starts to ripple out. And these aren't all our clients, but just to sort of show, like, we worked on a coffee shop, so then when we went to go work for an ice cream shop, they believed we could do it. And funny enough, like, the architect on the Will project is the same architect on the Bombshell project years later. So, like, all things intertwine. Anything you want to add before I keep going?
I was contemplating whether to add this through conversation or just to add it right now, but I think it's worth noting too that when we launched, we didn't really know what we were going to do in terms of initial self-promotion. So a lot of these initial projects, like saying yes to the Stockyard project and just like doing it for this trade and like getting some work out there, was so that we were able to show that we could work together and that we had work to put on a website, and these like really baby steps at the very beginning of our projects.
Yeah, we have really bad band photos we can show you later if you want to see them. We literally did launch a website with nothing on it. We can talk about that after. So this is just a slide of some of the work that we've made in the last 10 or so years. The studio, we started it in 2013. So what happened was Lil came to visit me in my little apartment in Pontiac, where a lot of Cranbrook people have lived. We were like, yeah, we kind of want to freelance, but it's scary to do it alone. And then we were like, do you want to just do it together? So we pulled up a random word generator. Unsold was the fourth word that came up. We looked at each other and we're like, yeah, that's it. So yeah, we started a weird website with nothing on it and started just bragging to our friends that were designers and hire us. And it's led to a lot of really great projects. So some for Cranbrook, which we're really proud of, but others that are more traditional. But I think the thing that has been really important to us is we love working in our community. Like, I think that's something that I remember being at Cranbrook and feeling really impressed by people who are working at Google or Target or Martha Stewart or these places, when in reality, we have so much more creative control working for people who are local or just starting. And so I think that we've had a lot of freedom in our work, and I will talk about that more, but to not feel like any of the work is less than because it's in the Detroit area. And we do work in New York and other places too, but I think that's something to talk about. So with that, I'll turn over to Elise, but that's our basic story.
In the same document?
Oh, sorry.
Wait, I can figure it out.
This guy.
Yeah, there we go. All right, hi everyone. I'm Elise DeChard. I'm the owner of E&D Studio, as Lynn said. And I graduated from Cranbrook in 2017, so I came here in 2015 from New York. Prior to coming to Cranbrook, I was working in architecture, design, and development in New York. And so my career really started after undergrad working on like architecture proper. And so I was working on New Lab at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a big collaborative design and manufacturing center. There's a new one here you might have heard about that opened a couple of years later. We did some renovations of an old factory in Philadelphia into artist space and co-working space, and other kind of adaptive reuse projects. And so really centering my career at the beginning around adaptive reuse and around the things that I was really interested in. So during undergrad, I got really fascinated by the way that like architecture writes itself, or histories write themselves on architecture. And so I dove into my career and sort of tried to do that through condos, through manufacturing centers, through art spaces, et cetera. But I was working in New York for about 7 years and was really kind of over it and was sort of disenchanted with the capitalist way that the structures of development work in that city. And I was working on, like the story is, I was working on this 7-story townhouse, and we didn't know what to put on the 7th floor because no one needs 7 stories in their house. And I was like, all right, this is maybe my breaking point. I'm gonna go to grad school, take myself a little sabbatical, and figure out what I personally, as a designer, want to bring into the world. And so I ended up at Cranbrook in 2015. And while I was here, I did a lot of thinking about like what a practice could be that would be at the intersection of design and art and architecture and making, and maybe a little bit of development too. And I also built a bunch of installations, some of them in the architecture school, some of them around the city of Detroit. For my thesis, I bought a house in Pontiac and renovated it into an art gallery and artist residency that I ran for a couple of years after Cranbrook. Meaghan Lill came to some of the openings way back. And then upon graduation, was trying to, again, figure out what I wanted to do post-graduation, that kind of like, okay, I've got this, and now what? And so did a couple of things. I had some collaborations with friends, Rebecca Birmingham and Cy Bodson. Cy was also a Cranbrook grad, doing some conceptual projects. I had a design-build collaboration with Fernando Bales called Campo Collective. We worked together for a couple of years. And then in 2019, I decided I really wanted to start an architecture studio, kind of start my own studio, and really focus in on the design aspect of everything. And so fast forward, it's been 5 years. We threw a huge party to celebrate in January this year, and big party. And it's now a 5-person architecture studio, me, 3 designers, and a marketing admin person, operating in Detroit, all women at the moment, though not always, but mostly women typically, and doing a whole bunch of different kinds of projects, mostly centered in Detroit, mostly like Lil and Meg are talking about, working with local community and working with the people around us. So a couple of recently built projects to talk about kind of what we're working on. In the top corner, Lower Town is in Ann Arbor. I just told Gretchen that the architecture students should go there on Monday, maybe, for a coffee. It's a bar and cafe and beer garden that we recently won an AIA award for, which is cool. There's a sunroom, a solarium attached to a Tudor home in Detroit, kind of a very high-class, high-gloss, dramatic space for hanging out and entertaining in. At the bottom in the center, we've got Folk, which is a cafe in Corktown that we renovated post-COVID into kind of a hybrid market cafe that since has evolved again since then back into a full-service restaurant. And then flanking that on either side, 2 of the kind of design build projects that we still sometimes do in the studio. So a bat house in a community garden, and then a furniture project that we did in 2020 where, because no one could come to the gallery, we asked people to drop off their furniture and we repaired it for them and then gave it back to them as part of an art practice. And then just a couple of projects that we have in the works. So again, it's continually changing and ever evolving, but we've got a 6,000 square foot new build brewery paired with a party store, abandoned party store. It's been empty for like 15 years that we're turning back into kind of an art market, an artisan cafe. We've got a house, an owner's childhood home that we kind of gutted and transformed into this really geometric space. Retains the fireplace that he hung out around when he was a kid, but kind of completely modernizes every other aspect of it. Community center in an old church. Bottom left is Vesper Books and Wine, which actually will open in a couple of weeks. I just got word today, so that's exciting if you like books or wine, which I like both of. You should check it out in Detroit, in Core City. And then Stanley Hong's Mania Cafe is a historic old Chinese food restaurant that we have a design to transform into a music venue. And all of that is some of the things that we're doing. And yeah, look forward to questions.
All right, so, thank you for that. I wish they moved now. Can you hear me? All right. So I'm going to stay out of it as much as possible, and I don't, probably after I ask the first question, that'll be it for me. But, I've asked them to think about, what did they wish they collectively and individually, what did they know that they know now that they wish they knew? Sorry, I'm asking this very badly. What do you wish you knew when you graduated that you learned from doing what you're doing now? So, we're starting with advice, but you can guide this anywhere you want it to go after this, but why don't we start with that?
I'll kick it off. Let's just say that there are a lot of things. We've been doing this for over a decade now, so every experience is a learning experience, essentially. But I think one of the very first things that we realized very quickly about running our studio is that focusing on graphic design, we can be the world's best graphic designers, but the world's worst people who work with our clients, or better known as like customer service people. With the studio at this scale, you're working directly with clients, right? You're presenting your work to clients. Clients are approving the projects. Clients want something that you might not think is the right direction. And I think very, very early on, we realized that we're in this really interesting role where we actually have to project manage in a way that we didn't expect. We had to educate our clients in a way that maybe we didn't quite anticipate we needed to do at that level. So a lot of that kind of adjustment happened very, very early on as we were working.
Yeah, we had many clients say to us, like, we've rehired you. Yeah, you're good designers, but you actually answer our emails. And so I think that idea of what Lillian's talking about is like actually knowing how to invoice people, communicate with them. The idea of over communication is better than under communication has gone really far for us. But I would also say, like, there's a lot I wish we had known, but I also am glad we knew nothing, because I think if I knew as much as we did now, I might not do it. Like, I know that sounds bad, and I'm not trying to discourage. I think you have to be a little insane to do it, because you have to really put yourself out there and hustle for a few years. I think it took us probably 3 years until we had consistent work coming to us that we wanted to do. Like Lillian alluded to, there were certain projects we took because we knew that sort of like ripple effect of like getting what we wanted would eventually happen. But you do have to do some projects you might not want to do in the beginning. And I think just knowing that none of that is permanent and you're working towards something that becomes a little bit more niche or perfect for you is coming if you do it right. So I would say that looking back, I'm glad we didn't know as much, because I think it made us who we are now. So yeah.
That's a really beautiful answer. I think the power of the amateur, right? Like this idea that if you know everything, you're kind of stuck in the status quo, right? And you might not be able to rethink things in the same way. But if you come into it as an amateur, as someone who doesn't necessarily have an established process, you have this ability to create something new and to really figure out what you want to do and the way that you want to work. And I think that definitely applies to me as well. My total career is 15 years since I graduated undergrad, and for 10 of that I've been working for myself, right? So like my career working for other architects is very limited, and actually for half of that I was working for a developer. So, I came into it knowing a lot of things, right? And knowing how to design and knowing how to do a lot of technical things, but having to design a business, which is a big part of running a studio, was something that I sort of did from the ground up and allowed me a lot of creative freedom, and some headaches as well. So I think I would say the business side of things, right? Like how to find the right consultants, or how to write invoices and manage the finances, or how to be a boss, right? I have 3-4 staff working for me. And learning how to manage a team and lead a team is a huge part of running a business. And I think that was something that I'm glad I learned on the fly, but it would have been nice to know some things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know where your mic is, but I will come up there in a second.
Hi. You talked a little bit about the ripple effect when you started the studio. Can you speak a little bit more about young entrepreneurs as they're getting started with prospective clients and opening their own studios?
Sure. So I would say I think there's always an instinct to try to find the perfect client or like something that's going to like make it for you, like sort of like the big kahuna. Like, why don't I have those people or those clients? And I think my best advice is, at least in our industry, don't enter competitions, don't do any of that stuff. You're going to get work from your local community first. So find the friend. So like my friend Mark, who wanted to be a chef, help them, like help each other in this, because you might not make a lot of money, you might make mistakes. So if you can find that person that maybe you have a little bit more leeway with to start, I think you can help one another. And also as you make mistakes, it's a little bit easier. But why not help someone you care about versus just doing a kind of project for someone and making a little bit of money? Because inevitably that's going to lead to stuff if you do a good job. So what's interesting, the book that I was mentioned, I interviewed designers from all over the world, and I'm kind of call them non-typical design places. So Alabama, Oklahoma, Morocco, Wales, wherever. And the thesis that I sort of came to in the book is that all of these people have done great work. All of them got their first project from someone they knew, whether that was a cousin, a friend, someone they went to elementary school's dad. Like, tell everybody you're looking for work and start with someone you know and you care about. And that's where it will grow. Word of mouth is how you're going to get work. It's not from Instagram and it's not from TikTok. At least I'm going to say 90% of it. That's how I feel.
I'll build on that through a story. So of course we're starting to get some projects. We're calling ourselves a design studio, right? Like we really defined ourselves this way, and starting to build that confidence in terms of how we present ourselves and seek work. So early on, we also got some advice that I'd like to share with you. So the advice was, you're aspiring to work on certain kinds of projects. You're just not doing that yet. So start to insert yourself where you might be encountering people from those industries. And funnily enough, we went to an opening here at Cranbrook Art Museum, and we were just chit-chatting, and we ended up chatting with Michael Porras of the architecture firm that I think they just won a big award, right? They were just noted like very #1 in the area type of award. So we were having a conversation with him, and we had just got business cards printed. So fresh new screen print, or no, they were letterpress business cards. And he was talking about a project that he was working on from the architecture side of things. It actually resonated with us. I think the client, it was Will Leather Goods, and we realized, oh my gosh, my purse is Will Leather, and your wallet was Will Leather. And we started to just get in this conversation. And through that conversation, we were able to present ourselves as designers who could actually be inserted into this project. So through that conversation, through that encounter, and through just defining ourselves as a design studio, he was able to introduce us to that client, and we were able to land that job. So that, I think, started to work out really well, that strategy. And this is a long way of saying this is networking. It's just being really strategic and thoughtful about like what you're actually trying to achieve through these kinds of conversations. It's not just showing up to any event and rubbing shoulders with people, but being intentional with the types of conversations that we're having, the types of events that we're attending, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the networking, the social aspect is very, very big. A lot of my early projects came first through a mentor, a colleague who has another small architecture firm, Tad Heideggergen of et al., and he was handing me projects that were too small for him, right? And so building sort of a network of other professionals within the local environment allowed us to start to meet clients and meet contractors. And then from there, many of our projects still to this day come through word of mouth, right? So they come through friends, they come through contractors, they come through clients who then refer us to other people. And yes, marketing is very important, and we have a website, and we have an Instagram, and we post on it, and sometimes we get cold calls, right? But a lot of it is really about building a network and building a community. And so, I moved here from New York. I came to Cranbrook, and so I built a Cranbrook community, and then I moved down to Detroit. and had to really sort of build a community there, and was really intentional about making friends in the art scene and making friends in the gallery scene and making friends who owned small businesses or small restaurants or things like that, so that I could start to sort of integrate into what was already happening, and then, you know, become a part of that and become a part of people sort of building out their dreams. Yeah.
I have a really quick follow-up. As far in the aspect of networking, outside of the AIGA, what other organizations do you recommend for young entrepreneurs to be involved in?
Well, so I know we all have been involved in Design Core Detroit, which Lil and I did before it was even called Design Core Detroit. It was like some long thing. And we did a residency program with them, and they taught, you know, business skills. We've taught for them. Elise went through their program. Yeah, and taught for them. So like Design Core Detroit is great, but I would actually say that it kind of goes back to, I think, what Lillian and Elise are talking about, is that you can hang out with other designers, but actually your work is going to come from people who are non-designers who need to hire you. So if you can join like your local city's business council, or you know, a startup tech, like a tech town sort of group, or I think that getting to places where there is a lack of designers is actually where you want to be. And so any sort of entrepreneurial startup business kind of hub is going to be the place to be.
Absolutely, and I think it can also just be person to person too, right? You're at an art event or an art gallery and you're, you know, talking to them about what you do, and there might be some synergies that you weren't expecting, right? You're not going there with the intention of making a business deal, but you are just going there as you, as a designer, as a business owner, and talking to people. Or you're at the bar and the bartender says, I'm thinking about opening up my own brewery. And you're like, well, I am an architect, so, you know. And that doesn't have to be cheesy, it can be really authentic, right? But like person-to-person connection is one of the things that I think makes a business really strong, right? Anyone can impersonally just kind of say like, hey, I'm here, I do this thing, come to me, right? But if you start engaging and you start going out to other people, that's a really good way.
Elise, you alluded to kind of a point in your career where it becomes like word of mouth and it's based on reputation. And I just want to build on that a little bit, because early on, right, you're seeking work, you're inserting yourself into these other avenues that you may not normally attend or go to. So you can generate a lot of work that way, of course. And then it comes a point where you build a reputation, right? Your reputation for doing good work, being good to work with is key as well. And then clients start to recommend you to their friend or to their colleague, and so on and so forth. And so that's a really big aspect of everything, is ensuring that you do build that reputation. I think 90% of our work comes from word of mouth. Mm-hmm. It's either continued work with existing clients, or maybe they're evolving or going through a growth phase of their work, their own projects. But it's also people that they know, people that maybe that they're collaborating with directly. So that's a really big piece of the puzzle as you start to gain experience.
Yeah, I think also if you intend to continue working in Detroit, like if Detroit is a place that you intend to stay, Detroit is a very small city, right? And it's a very tight-knit city. So even if it's not a word-of-mouth connection initially, certainly they know other people that you've worked with. And so reputation is really important. But Design Core is very important. And then if there's any architects in the room, AIA is really great. And we also have an architects happy hour that we do with some other small business architects. So if you're interested, let me know and I can send out invites.
Hi. I have a tactical question. All three of you mentioned the soft skills that you had to develop coming out of school, invoicing, educating clients, pitching new business. I'm curious how you guys manage that side of the brain, that skill set, with still pursuing your creativity and expressing yourself through your projects.
I think you have to know when you're smartest. And what I mean by this is, in the morning, that's when I'm creative. So I am someone who, if I open my email in the morning, I'm going to get sucked in, and my life is going to go on a different path than maybe I needed it to that day. So I would say, for me, I've learned emails and like junk stuff, not junk, but like Easy, I can put on Real Housewives in the background while I do. That's afternoon work. Creative, deep thinking work has to happen early in the morning. And so I think also sometimes it sounds tedious, but actually admin work can be a good break. Like, I know that we see that as like it's a brain drain, but actually I think the idea of seeing it as like, no, I thought really deeply about this problem on my creative side, and now I'm feeling a little burnt out. I'm going to switch over. So I feel like it sort of gives you a reprieve, or you have to kind of teach yourself to see it as a reprieve. And also, I love a to-do list. So the idea of like checking off 12 things on my to-do list of like, I sent an invoice, I got back to their email, I feel really accomplished. So trying to switch that optimism about admin work has been good for me, I think.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm a nighttime creative person, but it's really about time blocking, right? And so I think, for Meaghan and Lil, right, they're saying that like they are in academia and they're also doing their own projects and writing and doing art, right? And so it's all about sort of deciding when you're going to work on what. For me, the studio is a full-time practice, right? But I'm also a full-time business owner and manager, and then also trying to be a designer on top of that, right? And I'm in meetings for 20 to 30 hours a week, right? Depending on the week. And so figuring out like when I'm creative, right? Or when I can just get an uninterrupted day of like 8 hours to think about what I need to, I think is really important. And then fitting in sort of admin things between that. And I do think that like, for me as a business owner with multiple employees that I'm trying to like continually like empower and sort of help grow, a lot of it is also outsourcing, right? And figuring out how to empower someone else to maybe deal with one of those soft skills things. How to give, Meaghan, who's a designer on the staff, the ability to, instead of me educating the client, she educates the client, right? And I think that's good for her, and then also, good for me as well, because I get my time back.
Okay, there we go. First, thanks for doing this. And my question is kind of a little bit nuts and bolts, but I was hoping you could talk about how to get paid. What are the different ways of getting paid? Or maybe kind of different models of getting paid?
First of all, it depends on the type of project, but there are a number of ways that one can get paid, right? You could charge hourly, flat fee, et cetera. But I think one of the key things that we learned early on is actually how to embed getting paid into the project and into a contract. So ensuring that there was a really clear structure for being able to get paid, and it was understood and transparent on both sides. So for us, something that we learned early on that works really well is how to craft a solid project proposal. Within that project proposal, there are timelines, there's goals, there are objectives, there's also payments. And so we have that payment structure directly embedded into the project. And so it's very clear at this point in the project, we're gonna get X percentage of the flat fee, for example, or at this point in the project, it's gonna flip into an hourly fee for these reasons. And this is something that both client and designers sign off on before the project even starts. And so it creates this immediate transparency about how the project is gonna work overall.
Yeah, and there's clear stopgaps in that. So if you do not pay us, we are not continuing work until we receive payment. I also think in that clause, just to add, it's not when you pay us, the clock starts again on the calendar. It's like, oh, you have up to X amount of time to pay us, or an interest fee or late fee, or the calendar is going to move out. So there's ramifications if you don't follow said contract. So I think that's one way of getting paid. And you always have to withhold something at the end until you receive that final payment, and that has to be listed. So we will invoice for the final payment like ahead of us turning over the final files or the deadline often. So that way the like 30 days within they have to pay falls in that range, because as soon as you give up the final files or something, you've lost your power, and we're probably not going to sue someone because Lil and I are we're too tired. But it's also expensive to sue someone, and it's a lot of work for, at the end of the day, like $5,000 is a lot of money, but is it worth it for a headache and a lawsuit? I don't know. So I think that you've got to think about what at the end of the project can you hold on to a little bit that you don't release until you've received that final payment. I'd also say that in terms of getting paid, I think what Lil's talking about, like hourly, flat fee retainer models. They all exist and have different reasons why they exist. And so you have to know, like, a flat fee is good if the project is very clear, it's not amorphous. Hourly is good when it's amorphous, or maybe there's a lot of back and forth. Retainer is good if it's really clear what, you know, I'm doing for them each month, and, you know, they understand what those hours can go to and what they cannot go to. So I think you have to really know your own process and understand that. And that's where we made a lot of mistakes, where we charged a flat fee for a book, but we didn't put in how many edits were included. And Lil and I made like $2 an hour for the time it was over. And so I think you really, like, those are lessons you'll learn along the way. But I think getting paid is also, like, if people aren't going to give you a deposit, that's a good red flag if they're never going to pay you.
I think also, like, if you all do start a design business, there will be projects where you make $2 an hour, and just move on. It's gonna happen, right? Don't beat yourself up about it. You know, show yourself a little grace and compassion and say, that was a learning experience, and I know what to do next, which is put in a dedicated number of revisions. I think that's a really important thing that we definitely do. In architecture, it's really common to charge an initial payment up front, and so you credit that against the final invoice, which is another way of sort of ensuring a deposit or something like that, that someone is serious about moving forward. And we do similar things, right, where we withhold work or we don't continue working if we're not paid on time. And yeah, I think just full transparency, making sure everyone is really aware of what's coming up front is the best way to do that.
Templates for these contracts?
Book. That'll be one. So there's that. No.
Speaking of getting paid.
I would say, Blooms are really happy with me. We use a software called FreshBooks. That's what we use for as an accounting service, and they have a lot of templates built in that make, like, invoicing and things easy. I would say, in terms of contracts, your professional organization is the best place to look. So AIGA has an excellent contract that you can kind of copy paste out of, and they even have it by projects. If you're doing UX UI design, if you're doing motion graphics, if you're doing branding, I'm sure AIA has something similar. That's more like terms and conditions. In terms of proposals, I'm not sure where it's hard to find places. That's why I made that book.
Buy Meg's book, but also, you know, reach out to your mentors, right? So my initial proposal was based on my friend Demetrius in New York, right? His proposal, and it's since evolved since then, and I have also passed down our current proposal format to others, right? And so I think if you build community within your professional networks, even if it's not like a formalized professional organization, that's another way to sort of learn how it's done. Always recommend talking to a lawyer about an actual contract. It is really important.
Can we dig a little deeper into used terms, flat fee and hourly, just to give us some, like, an example of what kind of work might fall under each of those different categories?
So I would say flat fee, that's like website maintenance. That's something where during the months, a client might come to us, and one month they might have 1 million edits. They have a new event coming up, but then we don't hear from them for a while, or maybe we're not sure. They have some ideas, but it's kind of hard to nail down what they're looking for. So hourly seems to work best for that case, because it's going to make sense for us to just sort of cover our time, because we can't put our finger on how much time that would take. Whereas flat fee for us, a good example would be, say, building a brand, right? So we can understand very clearly a process that we are going to do strategy, then we're going to do the design phase, which includes 3 separate directions plus 2 rounds of revision. And then that's, you know, you're getting X deliverables, you're getting brand guidelines, et cetera, for that flat fee. But then what's interesting is Lil and I, for the implementation phase of the project, where maybe we're outputting postcards or like little things that have a lot of back and forth, might be hourly. So like within one proposal, there can be sort of different things. And then a retainer model might be, you know, that you're going to do the same amount of work for someone kind of every month. So you might charge a reduced rate for them to guarantee that for 6 months you are going to have a $5,000 coming in from them of worth of work. But again, you have to be really clear, because for example, Lil and I can make a lot more money doing a brand as a flat fee So we need to make it clear to the client, like, your 10 hours a month is not, we're not going to make a logo for that. Like, we would charge separately. So you have to be really clear if you're doing a retainer, what within the month is actually within bounds and what's realistic. So usually if we do a retainer, you require a monthly meeting with the client to kind of say, what do you anticipate this month? What can we actually get done with your hours? I hope that helps.
Hello. I just want to say, first of all, shameless plug, I would be happy to represent any of you in court if you are too tired to go. I actually think I would love it. I have a very specific question about working with clientele, and it's coming from my own experience, but maintaining a creative, I don't want to say control, but leadership, a creative leadership with client. And I don't know if you've run into clients who kind of like know exactly what their logo wants to look like or something like that, and then they say, okay, just go make exactly what I wanted to do. So is it worth working with clients like that? Have you worked with clients like that? How do you maintain creative leadership? This is a gap I'm really trying to fill in my own process. Thank you.
Start this one. This is a great question and something that everybody is going to encounter, right? So a big part of what we do and what we've really figured out how to develop effectively, I believe, is educating a client. And I know that sounds kind of like top down or maybe kind of forceful, but from the very beginning of a project, we really want to make it clear what they understand they're asking for themselves. Because I think often they may come to the table and say, I need X, Y, and Z. I need a logo, I need a website, I need a poster, for example. And that's where we're going to have a conversation with them up front. We're not going to dedicate a ton of time to this until we get paid, but we're going to have a conversation up front about ensuring that they really understand what they truly need. So, you know, they didn't go to design school. They don't know that a brand, for example, is much more than a logo. So we'll start by having that conversation and explaining what an effective brand is. How can we design something for you that you're going to be able to continue to use 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So we're really communicating and educating the client about what the value we're bringing to the table is. Through these kinds of conversations, we find that the client might kind of loosen up just a little bit in terms of what they initially believed that they needed. But of course, we're still going to listen to them. We're not going to, suddenly, strong arm them and tell them that, instead of this logo, you need something completely different. Part of that also comes through when we execute a kind of strategy phase with them. So going into a deeper process with them, this is after we've been paid, so when the project started, but going into a deeper process where we can really clearly define the goals and objectives of what they need, and that then informs the design decisions. So it becomes something that's much more than like an aesthetic personal preference. Well, we make it very clear up front as well. We usually start with a 15-minute phone call, truly. And it sounds short and brief, but it allows us to get to know one another quickly, understand the project a little bit more in depth, and see if it's a good fit. And from there, that's where we start to learn a little bit more about, their timeline. Are there red flags in that timeline? Their budget. Are there red flags in the budget? Some of these conversations are a little bit tricky to have too on the phone, but
it's like dating. We've all been on bad dates. You got to suss it out. And sometimes you're not right and sometimes you are. But I think to keep it short, we're just really upfront. And I would say, to tag onto Lil, it's positioning yourself as a leader from the front. So like you set the agenda of the meeting, you like send the Zoom and the calendar invite. You are always putting yourself in a place where they see you as leader, not as their mouse clicker, or as Elliot would say, mouse wanker, I think. So it used to say to us all the time. But I also think those conversations, a lot of people don't like to talk about money. And so oftentimes, as a way to sort of gut check the conversation, we just will throw out a number and say, well, right now the studio is not taking on projects for less than, and again, that number can shift based on who it is. So we might say, we're not taking on projects for less than $5,000 right now. Does that work for you? And again, that's a minimum, but it at least, if they're not serious, they'll peace out real quick. And if they are, they'll hang in. And then you at least know, like, okay, maybe we're in. And not that everything's about money, but I think it can cut through a lot, because when we first started, we'd like drive to Detroit, we'd park, we'd get there early because we're anxious, we'd buy them coffee, we'd have an amazing conversation, and then find out they are waiting for money from something. And that was never going to happen. So I think that, like, you have to protect your labor and your time, and it's not about being rude, it's not about, you know, not forming relationships, but it's really like, I want you to take me seriously. And one way of doing that is by positioning yourself in that way.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I think so at END, the first hour-long meeting is always free. We typically like go to the site, because in architecture you need to see the space often before we can see maybe what the red flags are or what the possibilities are. But we do ask all of those questions really, really upfront. And I think when someone has a very clear idea of what they want, but they're not necessarily an expert in that field of the thing that they're looking for, right? Scott, maybe, right? 3D design, right? Someone thinks, I need to sit down, I need a chair, right? Like they've got an object that serves as a stand-in for the need, or they need a brand, they need a logo, right? It's the symbol of what they're looking for. In architecture, it's often the same. And so really what we do is you say, okay, I need a chair. Well, what kind of chair, and how do you like to sit in the chair, and what does the chair mean to you? And you start asking questions to really understand what's behind the things that they're presenting to you, or the things they're saying that they want you to recreate. In architecture, we get a lot of Pinterest boards, right? So someone says, here's what I want, and it's just 25 pictures of a kitchen, right? And there's actually no threads between them, but if you start to talk to people about them, they're like, oh, we really like natural light, and we really like greenery, and we want to have a view of the backyard. And so by asking questions and sort of really understanding where they're coming from, you can maybe help guide them and lead them into a design that is better than what's already, preconceived.
I want to give permission that you can take on projects that never see the light of day in your portfolio. So actually, Wes Taylor, who I know is a mentor to some folks in the room, he was a studio mate of ours at Cranbrook, and he used to refer to these as peanut butter projects. Like, they're smooth, and like, you just do it for the money. Like, not everything has to be this like amazing portfolio piece that like is so amazingly conceptual and pushes the bounds. It can literally just be like, I want money to go on vacation, so I'm doing this project, and like, it's easy, I don't care. Like, I think that's fine, and I don't think we talk about that enough, that like, you craft your way you want people to perceive you through a portfolio, through your Instagram, but there's a lot of stuff Lil and I have done that like, we're not showing that to anybody. It's just happening behind the scenes. So you have the ability to take that on, as long as you feel like you still are always having some project that is moving your practice forward. Like, not every project can be that kind of peanut butter project, but a bulk of it can be.
100%. Every design business that's showing you all of these beautiful buildings or websites or whatever is doing what we call the bread and butter projects, right, in the background. They're designing a parking garage, or they're designing some really small website, right, that they're not actually going to show, and that's okay, right? That's part of the process, and that's part of the client service aspect of the process, right, to help someone achieve something. And you don't have to show everything that you do, right? No one's online persona is every single aspect of their life. Ditto for a business, right? And so don't be ashamed of taking on a project that's not, the end all be all, or not the thing that you want to be known for. That's okay. It's part of running a business, and everyone is doing it.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Do you have anyway, I'll just go quickly. Thanks again also for being here. I wondered about, you mentioned like the mistakes you've made and what you've learned from them. I wonder if you had good mistake stories and what you've learned from them. The $2 an hour one's a really good one. But they're painful, right, in the process, but they're inescapable and necessary, because they're the things that you have to go through. You can't know it all ahead of time, and every project is different, every client is different, right, and that's the challenge. So you can't just keep doing the same thing. Is there a particular moment where you really had a kind of learning experience through something that went wrong?
Absolutely. There's one that jumps out at me that was at a certain point when we were working where we weren't making it explicitly clear what fell under billable hours. And so we were working with a client that there was a ton of scope creep. There was a lot of like emailing at odd hours of the day. There was a lot of like, oh, can you like make this little tweak, this edit? Can you actually add this onto the project? And we were adding all of those hours up, but when we sent that bill to the client, she lost her mind, right? She was not expecting to be billed that much for all of those things. And so that goes back actually to what I was talking about in terms of crafting a solid project proposal at the very beginning of the project, because you can make it really clear what your billable hours are, and that you're going to be billing for this meeting, and you're going to be billing for these edits and this email exchange, et cetera. So that's one example that comes to mind. And I honestly think that was a very pivotal moment in our studio. So that's why it immediately jumped out at me, because we had this moment where we're like very concerned about our relationship with the client, of course. And I think there was frustration on both sides, which we really didn't want to have to face.
Yeah, that was a good one. So now we basically in the proposal just go to nuts and bolts. We literally will say like, we are going to check in every 5 hours, and we will via email, and we are not continuing to the next set of 5 hours until you've approved that in writing. So that way they're constantly updated on, especially when we work hourly, it's really important. The mistake that comes to mind for me is that we designed an invitation for someone, and I got a call from the client saying, oh God, it's so painful, the date is wrong. And I almost shit myself, I'm not gonna lie.
We were like, stop the press.
But literally, but what's so funny is that in the contract we have, it says proofing is the responsibility of the client. So I could have thrown it back in this person's face and said, you can blame me, but it's on you. Like, proofing is the client. It says that in the contract. But I didn't want to burn a bridge. It's also not helpful. Like, at that point in time, like, the event's coming. We got to fix it. So I was like, all right, let's not vent in a circle. Let's figure out a solution to the problem. So we were like, let's make this cute. How can we like just be like, we double reminded you that it's the right date? Like, it was a panic moment and it sucked, but we figured it out. And that was like maybe the first or second time we worked with this person. We still work with her today. Like, I literally emailed her a project today. So I think the lesson or the mistake that I was just like, we're gonna problem solve this. We're not gonna complain, vent, circle, blame, finger point, was a really good moment for us to learn, I think, and has sort of been our motto in a lot of ways. And there have been clients where if that happened, we'll get through that project and never work with them again. In that instance, it was not like an unforgivable thing. We've worked together for almost 10 years now. So it was worth that. But yeah, that sour gut feeling of getting that phone call still sits deep.
Yeah, oh my God. The problem-solving mindset is definitely the way to go. I don't know if, are there any architects in the room? Anyone? Just you, Gretchen? So architecture is like a really complex practice, right? And you need to calculate the bathrooms, and you need to calculate the egress, and you need to calculate the number of people in the building, and also make it an award-winning design and all of this. And that's really quite hard sometimes, right? And everyone, again, makes mistakes. That's the thing that happens. We're human. And so I think, first off, really giving yourself some grace is really important. I think self-compassion is maybe like my #1 skill for anyone wanting to be a business owner. You're going to need it. And then 2, I think, just whatever it is, whether it's the wall is falling down and it's because it's an old building and it's not your fault, or the sewer line is broken, or maybe you made a mistake on a code calculation, it doesn't really matter. Just come at it, like, calm yourself down, and then think, how do I fix this, right? And I think working together, really kind of like figuring out the collaborative way to go about that works for everyone involved in the project. And, at the end of that, right, you maybe made a mistake, again, as all humans do, but you solved it, and that's the thing that everyone's going to remember.
To sum it up, the big learning lesson is focusing on the solution and not the problem. And that's what Meg was saying. And that's what we had to tell the client, right? Like, the only pathway is forward, right? So let's figure out what to do. We came up with this cute idea. We just had to roll with it. And if we festered on the problem, then no one would be happy.
Hello? Okay. Hi, thank you all so much for being here. My question is about difficult clients. especially when you're starting out. This is a very small studio. Like maintaining all of those relationships is very important, and doubly so in a city that's as small as Detroit. So how do you kind of deal with that once you've taken on a project and realized that a client is a lot more difficult than you expected them to be, or maybe you've even reached the point where you kind of feel like, I don't really want to take on more projects from this client, but I want to maintain that relationship because they occupy a space that you would also like to do more work in. So how do you kind of resolve that?
Well, first I'll go back to like dating. So I think, or maybe this one's not like dating. This one's more like training someone or training a dog. Like you have to set your boundaries early. And what I mean by this is that Lil and I, again, to go back to mistakes, when we were first starting out, we were overeager. And so we had really bad boundaries where like we were checking email at like 9 p.m. on a Friday or answering emails on 2 p.m. on a Saturday with a new client. And while at the beginning, maybe that was fine. As we've gotten older, like Lil now has 2 children. I am department chair. I like to run on the weekend. Like I don't want to be doing that. Like I'm too tired. I'm getting old. I'm not old, but I'm getting old, right? Like, and so this idea that when we started to continue to work with this client, we had already trained her that was okay. And so when we kind of started to change the boundaries on her, she got really upset with us. And so I would say my best advice would be set boundaries now that you feel like you can live with for a while in your lifestyle. And then the second I would say is when we realized that was no longer a good fit, we broke up with her. And like, it was hard, but I think you also have to know that like giving permission to make space for other people who are a better fit for your life is like, Lil and I always have this conversation, like, should we let her go? Like she's a paying client, but like, God, I hate when I see their email come in, I'm like, ugh, like it's awful. That's not a good feeling. So if you let them go, you're making space for someone else or something better to come along. And so there's that. I know when we broke up with that person, the way we sort of phrased it is like, we've really enjoyed working with you. Our lifestyle is just really different. We really think you need someone who's got a little more energy than we do now. So we always made it about them. Like, we can't serve you anymore. And while that is a hard conversation, I think sort of always positioning them as like the hero in the story of why you don't want to or why you can't serve them as well as they need is a good, polite way to break up with them. It's not you, it's me.
I had a question just about, you manage people. You've decided your marketing is the non-architect in your firm, right? So that's the piece of the work that, you brought in other expertises, and you have to make decisions together, which I'm a studio artist. I don't do that. I couldn't do that. And when I collaborate, we know who's in charge. We take turns or whatever. But how do you vet your people and choose your people? It's kind of related to your clients, but how do you know that somebody's going to be a good person to bring into your firm? And
great question. In terms of hiring, we always, like we do for clients, hire for personality and fit, right? So it's cultural fit, it's ideological fit, it's are you going to work well on the team, right? Or are you going for a client, are you going to work well with our team? And then do you want to be here, right? So if a client doesn't necessarily want to work with you, or if you're having a red flag, I think listen to that, right? Like go with your gut. It usually will pan out the way that you think it will. And if you do end up in that situation, just finish it out. Right? If you have, if you're in the middle of a project, I would say finish it out and figure out how to make sure that everyone is, at least content at the end. And then if you do have the opportunity to sort of break up with a client that's not vibing with you, I think that's okay. Going back to hiring though, I've had the joy over 5 years to work with many people who have come in and out of the studio, and my current team is amazing, so shout out to them. Back in the office, wondering where I am perhaps. But I want to hire for personality fit. I want to hire for curiosity, right? I'm not necessarily ever hiring for skills, because skills you can learn, right? Or knowledge about the discipline or sort of like technical aspects you can learn. But if you're curious, if you want to learn, if you're eager, if you're excited to sort of interact and collaborate, that's the things that I'm hiring for. And we do that obviously through interviews, sometimes 1 or 2, And it gives you a really good feel for how a person's going to be on the team. We interview also, the entire team interviews every candidate. So it's always about a group.
Having a partnership, we were friends at Cranbrook first. Like, we met here. We knew we worked well together. It's like, but I think we got really lucky. Like, we still like to be friends outside of work, which I think is unique. We've worked together for 10 years. But we have an operating agreement. Like, Lil and I have a prenup. I'm not gonna lie. Like she's my wife, my work wife, literally. But we have an operating agreement, and it says things. And this was something that in that Design Core Detroit residency, they set us up with a lawyer, and it's really important. And it was things that we didn't even think about. Like, there's only 2 of you, so like, how are you gonna solve decisions? And the lawyer was like, y'all can play rock, paper, scissors. It doesn't matter as long as that's written in your operating agreement. Or if, say I want to sell, I have to get permission from Lil of who I would sell my half of the business with. I can't suddenly wake up one day and say like, hey, Lil, you're working with Scott for the rest of your life. Good luck. Like, so I think there was some considerations of working with someone else that we didn't even know. So having a lawyer sort of draft that up was really helpful. And the other thing I would note about working with a partner is that Lil and I see eye to eye on a lot of things, but we're also very different, and I think our skills complement each other. So I think some people's inclination is like, we're so good at the same things, like we would work really well together, when in fact you need someone who's the yin to your yang, right? So like, I'm sure you guys can start to notice, like, I love talking way more than Lil does, right? Like, but Lil's really detail oriented, and I'm much more of like the big broad strokes idea. Like, when I'm like ready to move on, Lil keeps me in check, right? So I think that she's really thoughtful. Sometimes I'm clumsy about stuff. Like, I think that you need someone who balances you. So if you are thinking about partnering with someone, make sure that those things are there. And I would also say, if you have a friend who you think about, you want to work with, but they drive you crazy because they're always late to dinner, imagine how it's going to be with a client. So I would say be realistic. Like, I would trust Lil with my InDesign file as well as my dog. You know, like, I trust her in general. So think about that stuff.
Scott? I have a question about how you measure success for your studios, and if and how that success measurement informs your year-over-year growth.
Told you I love talking way more than Lil. We like data, so Lil and I definitely are like, we made more than last year. Cool. However, I don't think, because Lil and I, as I mentioned, we're not totally supporting ourselves from the studio, so money is not our main driver always. So I feel like our measure of success has been, are we maintaining clients that we like? So are we continuing to get work from people, or did they sort of disappear suddenly? What's happening there? I also think our measure of success has been, are we growing? So Lil and I always talk about this. For a long time, it would drive us crazy that we had sort of piecemeal projects where we do these little bite-sized things, and it felt like we had 20 projects going on at once to make that amount of money. Our goal has recently been, we want to do less projects or have less clients going that are more deeper dive projects. So we're really excited that like we're starting a project that is going to start in December that will be deeper dive. We're making a good amount of money, but we can really focus on that. And so I think sometimes for us, our measure of success is, are we moving towards a space where we're doing projects and spending our time in the way that we hope we can?
And I'm going to add something on that's adding a little dimension to this in a way, because we're thinking about our success as a studio, but it's always also related to our client success. So beginning any kind of project, we are learning the goals and objectives of whatever that particular project is. What does the client want to do with their business? How they're hoping that it grows over the years? If there's a particular event, who are they hoping to attract to that event? And it's, for me, always so gratifying when we're able to help our client achieve those goals. I know it sounds cheesy, but like, for me, that's also saying like, we did a good job. Like, we are thinking like designers. We implemented some really strong like design tactics and strategies to make this happen. So it's not just thinking about like, I love the way this thing looked that we designed, but like we really deeper down like made all of these things happen. We're thinking about the bigger impact of our work.
Yeah, we had a client come to us that wanted us to rebrand, and funny enough, the lemonade is for sale in the Fika Cafe, which is kind of fun. But they came to us and they were like, we eventually want to sell this business. And for us, that's like, okay, they want to go national and they want to sell this. So how do we design for it? They literally, like a few months ago, were like, hey, we have some bittersweet news. Can we meet with you? And basically they were firing us because they sold the business. But that's good.
We thought this was working, but hello? There we go. Yeah, that was me getting really excited because we thought that was great news. When we got that email, I was actually like, oh my gosh, I think they're breaking up with us because they sold. And it was this moment of celebration across the board.
Yeah, so for me, that, like, to go to Lil's point of like, yeah, and that again opens up space for us, like, what's the next thing? Who's the next business that we can take on?
Yeah, client happiness and client success is a huge part of it, right? We're designing places to work that our clients might work in or own for many, many years, or houses that they might live in for, possibly the rest of their lives. And so we really want you to feel at home in those spaces, and we want you to feel like it fulfills your needs and like you have ownership over it. And so I think client happiness with the result is a big part of it. Client happiness with the process is also a huge part of it, right? So did you enjoy working with us? Were you sort of engaged, and did you feel empowered during this whole long slog of architecture and construction? I think employee happiness is a really big part for me, right? As a studio that's like really focused on supporting and sort of nurturing the people that work there, I think I want to make sure that everyone feels, inspired when they're at work. And when we do our like employee reviews, we talk about like what you're inspired by and what makes you want to come to work, and what vision do you have for yourself or the business, right? And so do you feel invested? Do you feel inspired? Do you feel empowered at the office? I think is a huge part of it. And that takes the form of both professional things like professional development and field trips and PTO and all of those things. And then, of course, metrics. So we have a proprietary software for architects that tracks like project process and the way that you're billing across each project. And so we have a lot of data about how successful the business is being financially, and that's really helpful, and it's good to see it grow year after year. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one. Can we talk a little about the business dynamics of scaling a studio? Like maybe the why, when, how of scaling.
Yeah, why, when, how? You're never going to be ready, and so you just need to know that ahead of time, I think. When I started in 2019, it was just me. I quickly hired a freelancer and then another freelancer, and so for 2019 and into the beginning of 2020, it was me and two freelance designers, Kapish Chima and Sophie Yan, also both Cranbrook grads, Scott, Sophie, and the studio was sort of operating that way until COVID hit, and you all might remember that. It kind of sucked, essentially decimated the business, and had to build it again from scratch. And that was a really interesting experience. I think made me very resilient and adaptable, also good business owner qualities. But when we sort of like relaunched in the fall of 2020, it was again kind of still freelancers, but I kept thinking, this is not the way to be sustainable. This is not the way to kind of like make this a studio. It feels a little bit like we're all just working out of a wood shop next to a table saw, which was in fact what we were doing. And it was not a great place to hold conference calls. And so I thought, okay, I need an office, right? And if I have an office, then I need to put everyone on salary, right? Like I need to make this a thing that is sustainable and that supports the people that are working there. Health insurance, et cetera, all of these things, and the offices. And then if I have the offices, I need the chairs and the computers and all of the equipment for that office. And so I kind of calculated out all of the things that I thought I needed to get into that next step, right, of like established office that clients could come to that didn't have any table saws within 10 feet. And I thought about kind of the finances of where we were at and what we needed to be at in order to make that jump. And so I made that jump in March of 2021 and hired on the first full-time staff. And I will say that I made that jump a little bit prematurely, right? And I think that that's really common, right? Because in order to level up, you need to jump first. It's really hard to, okay, now we have 10 projects lined up and now I can hire someone, because hiring someone takes a really long time. And so actually then you're at a deficit in a different direction. And so I think the best planning that you can do while assuming that nothing is going to go according to your plan would be my advice with regards to that.
We've stayed intentionally small. And that's a choice that Lil and I have made because the competition that we would have, we find like running a small boutique studio is okay, but Lil and I maybe have a little bit of control issue. But I think we've seen it as a bonus or service that when you work with Unsold, you are working with us. Like that's what you're getting. And I think in the world, especially now where there's AI and Canva and whatever, this idea of like human connection is really important. And the only way that Lil and I can guarantee that we're going to be able to offer that service is if one of us is involved. And I think people are buying us. Like they like our portfolio, but I think I feel weird about saying this, but like I think they like working with us. Like I think they like us as people. And so if suddenly we have that first meeting and then we're like, oh yeah, and here's Joe, our junior designer, it's kind of like a weird thing. And so for us, that's been something where, because we don't do this every day 9 to 5 like Elise does, I think we don't have the same ability to have oversight or management because we're also doing academic stuff and whatever. So I think for our unique situation, being small has been a choice that has served us. And Brendan and Emily have stepped in and helped us when we've needed it, but we've never had a full-time employee because it's just something that we feel strongly that it should be us.
You know, with employees, with other designers on staff that aren't necessarily owners of the business, it does become something different, right? But there are studios where there's one front person and everyone else is back of house, right? And that's not the way that E&D Studio operates, right? It's very much everyone who is in the studio is involved in the project, is involved with the clients, right? And so while I might be the first person to meet you and you are sort of like buying into that personality of the studio, I think everyone else there also has their personality and they contribute and they get to work directly with the clients. And so it's, as long as everyone that's working there is a representative of the studio, that still continues to work in the same way, right? Everyone has the same sort of like mission and goal and ethos to the way that they work.
I guess I was wondering more about like hard numbers when you're invoicing people, and sort of what is your hourly, what is your project span, depending on the project and how much you charge. I know some people are like, no, I have my fancy MFA, so I'm going to charge $30 more an hour, or I'm working for this big corporation that has lots of money, so I'll charge them this much. But for a similar project for mom and pop, I would charge them that much. Thinking about equity and how you're deciding to bill people.
Sure. I'm thinking about how to answer this in an effective way. I think for us, so the reason why I say that is because there's not like one hard number or like a perfect kind of formula that we use client to client. That said, we raise our hourly fee every now and then. Inflation and all sorts of other reasons and experience and those kinds of things.
Can you talk about where it started?
Where did it, yeah.
I think we started at like 50 an hour, and now we're at 150 an hour, I think. Something like that. Right?
I think that's right.
Sorry, we should know our numbers better.
I know,
than this.
well, and I'm also thinking
It's
back
also
to
a
how it
lesson.
grew. Yeah.
Well, I would add that it's not just about the client, it's about you and your calendar. So for example, going back to the peanut butter project, if Lil and I are kind of slow, I might be like, we just need some stuff happening. So like, and someone comes to us and they don't have a gigantic budget, like, okay, we can work with that just to like keep us moving, keep us thinking, keep the studio going. But I will also say like, we're doing the same, we just bid out the same projects. One was for a big architecture studio in Chicago. We're billing a 5-figure number for that. Whereas in, there's a little local women-owned startup, we're billing 4 figures for that. And so in my mind, I feel no guilt about that in any way, shape, or form, because the reach that our work will have for that architecture studio and the amount that they'll bill off our work is way greater than what that small women-owned business is going to be. So I don't think it's just about the architecture studio has more money, therefore we're charging them more. It's also how much money are they going to make off our backs and our work. So I think that is where my conscience is like cool with that. But I would also say depending on how busy you are. So sometimes someone's a pain in the ass or they seem like they're going to be annoying, they're going to get charged more. They get the asshole fee. Like, that's the reality. I mean, I'm sorry, but like, you want high touch, you want lots of meetings, you want lots of phone calls, we're charging you more. That's the reality. But I think that, to go to Lil's point, you have to raise your rates every year or so, just because you're getting more experience, you're getting better. But I also think it's okay to honor people who've been with you from the beginning. So we have some clients right now that they're not getting 50 an hour, but they're not the 150, because we have sort of this like loyalty built in with them, and we're not raising the rates. And so when we raise our rates, we'll say, hey, just so you know, we've raised our rates to X, so that way they're not bragging to all their friends. I've got this great graphic designer who's super cheap, but it at least acknowledges that we respect or see that they've stuck around with us too.
There's a lot that factors into it, as you're hearing, and some of it is also knowing like the client's budget. Sometimes we really want to work on a project and we know the client can't afford what we would normally charge. In cases like this, we also don't want to undervalue our business or undervalue the field and charge really, really too little, which I think is a big issue often that we see in design. So for projects like that, we'll often kind of bake in some kind of exchange. So for example, like maybe some of it is an in-kind donation, and we get a tax write-off for something, or we get to attend something that's part of that project that we might not normally have access to. So we try to think creatively about ensuring that we're, again, not underselling ourselves ever, but ensuring that we're, meeting the goals on both sides.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a lot of different answers. The short answer, I started out about 75 an hour, and now I'm 150 to 175, so that's kind of the monetary thing. I think that's pretty standard for a small business owner in the creative field right now. The sort of longer answer is within the studio, right, I charge about 3 times overhead on whatever the person needs to make, right? So whatever I should make or whatever an employee should make, because that covers your computer, your software, which in architecture is quite expensive, maybe your office expenses, or your printer, or all of these things. And so that's a pretty standard markup for any business, right? But specifically in a small design business, if you have your computer and your software, you should be charging for that in addition to what you should be making. We also have, within E&D Studio, we have kind of like it's not a formalized, but it's a sliding scale system, right? So if you're a community nonprofit, right, you will get charged a different rate than if you are a for-profit business that has a lot more reach, much like the story about the Chicago architecture firm. And there's also pro bono work that happens as well for really, really small projects on limited scopes. And it's really important to not devalue the profession, for sure, right? And also to understand that sort of as you're starting out, you're a startup, right? Your rates will be different than you are when you've been in business for 5 or 10 years, right? And so allow yourself to evolve. Remember to update that as you go, but definitely don't intentionally lowball the people around you that are also doing the same work, because that's bad for everyone in the business. Yeah.
I would note, don't forget taxes. So $150 an hour sounds like a lot, but 25% is probably going to go to the IRS. So, I think there's some business considerations that we don't always think of. And I would also say, there's a whisper network among designers. And so this is why having sort of the design network that is working sort of in your field is really important. So, for example, Lil is on maternity leave. I didn't want to bug her, so I called our friend Courtney and was like, yo, what should I charge for this? What would you think? What's your gut check? And so I think gut checking and making sure that, as Elise is saying, you're not undercutting everybody in your industry is really important. And ultimately, I think in the beginning, I don't want to say you should err on the lower end, but I do think just because you come out with an MFA doesn't mean you're going to provide a quality service. And so I think you have to really think about, if you're charging a high number, you have a higher bar that you're setting for the service you have to provide. And so I think that, again, about valuing, and I don't mean to devalue anyone, but thinking back, I'm like, Lil and I maybe weren't worth $50 an hour when we first started, because, you just are starting out. And so I think, giving yourself a little bit of grace in that can be helpful too.
To if any client, and this problem clients, right, will say, well, why are you charging that much per hour, right? It doesn't take that much work to do something per hour. You eventually begin to charge for not just your labor, but your experience, right? And your sort of knowledge and all of the things that are baked into the person, the designer that you are at that point. And so being able to sort of justify your rates based on what you're bringing to the table is something that you will be required to do. And so it's important to be able to like kind of provide that based on like industry standards or also like your own personal experience.
I'm going to throw one more complexity at you, which is sometimes charging by hour could actually end up being far less than if you were to charge a flat fee, because the more experience you have, sometimes you can just work faster. And so for some projects, flat fee actually makes a lot more sense.